Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A big story emerging today. The cost cap is back on the agenda and this time the punishments are set to be more severe. 3 teams apparently went over the limit last year in 2022. We know that Red Bull got a $7 million fine and a 10% reduction in their testing time for their breach of $2.2 million back in 2021. But apparently not just one team, but 3 teams have gone over last year with potentially massive penalties to follow. Who are these 3 teams? Why did they do this and not get it under control after what we saw last year? We're going to get into it all today. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. The Hungarian Grand Prix is coming up. This is Daniel Ricciardo's garage for this weekend. Pretty cool stuff. And to start out the day of massive stories, we've got rumours that the FIA is expected to approve potentially 2 new applications to the grid. We know that Andretti and General Motors and Cadillac, they've made an entry, and it's been quite clear that Ben Sulayem has wanted this to happen. He's been very forthright about this, maybe to such an extent that it's almost a little bit strange. But nonetheless, the FIA wants more teams on the grid. They get more money and, they want to expand the sport. It's understandable. Do Formula 1 themselves, FOM, Formula 1 management that Stefano Domenicali represents, or the F1 teams, will they agree to this? The rumour has it though that the FIA are going to say yes to both Andretti and to this high-tech Grand Prix team that's been operational in lower Formula divisions for some time and wants to take the step up. There's also apparently 2 other additions or applications that were made, one called Lucky Sun and a Rodin motorsport team from New Zealand. Those are less likely to be given the green light, and the FIA testing process is to be completed at the end of July, but it's already leaking through that Andretti and High-Tech Grand Prix could get the green light. So this would be very interesting, and then it would be in the court of Formula 1 themselves and the teams to decide, whether they agree, because it doesn't just take one party agreeing, the FIA, the governing body, and they have to approve whether the submission merits whatever their criteria are to get through to the next step, but then the teams have to agree. The Concord agreement, how much money do they want this team to pay to counter the dilution fees? Do they want any other team on the grid? Because some team bosses have made it quite clear that they're not a fan of any 11th team, pretty much regardless of the circumstances. So that's going to be a massive talking point over the coming months, I'm sure, because the FIA will be pushing for an 11th team, maybe even a 12th team. Apparently 2 of these applications might get green lit, but definitely other teams have other ideas about this. And this is only just the beginning. Christian Horner also confirmed that Daniel Ricciardo is indeed targeting, as of course he will be, the 2025 Red Bull seat. There is a chance, I think, that he gets the 2024 Red Bull seat. Checo Perez has a contract until the end of next year, but he's not performing right now, and if Ricciardo does really impress in the AlphaTauri, Horner obviously loves Danny Ric. I mean, not just from a personal perspective, but also as a, marketing man, right? Danny Ric, a possibility there at Red Bull is endless, and if you're Checo, you've got to be concerned. If a guy like Danny Ric is performing in the AlphaTauri and the amount of value that he can provide to a brand like Red Bull, which is effectively a marketing venture at the end of the day anyway, then you got to think that that's the way that they might tend to go. So we'll see, but he at least made it outright clear that Daniel firmly will be pitching in for that 2025 Red Bull seat. But let's go back to roughly this time last year. It was slightly later in the year last year, and that's why they're trying to speed up the process this time. It was around about Japan, Singapore last year, towards the end of the season, where there was all this talk about the cost cap breach. In 2021, the cost cap came into effect. The teams could only spend $145-ish million. There were some exceptions. There were some ways that teams were trying to fill the numbers to get around things, and the rules are written in a certain way. The teams are going to try and get around it in some respect. And I imagine that some of the teams, Red Bull especially, thought that they could maybe fudge the numbers a bit more than they were expecting to, and potentially thought that it wouldn't be policed as much as it actually was. They got caught overspending by $2.2 million in 2021. They were given a pretty much nominal fine and that 10% reduction in testing time for this season for the next 12 months, which, let's be honest, hasn't done much yet and probably won't do anything at all given the state of that current Red Bull car. But this, let's be very clear, was for 2021, and while this was coming out, it was almost the end of 2022. So if teams believed they could kind of get away with it, or it wasn't going to be enforced particularly leniently, they'd already done almost all of their spending by the time it became clear this was an issue. And that's why there were quotes we'll see in a second here from Christian Horner at the end of last season saying that multiple teams will have overspent in 2022, because in 2022 there was massive inflation, and in terms of like transport costs and energy costs, it was costing the teams more to do business. And I think it was, they wanted additional money in the bank so they could achieve that. The FIA basically said, no, these numbers, okay, we'll give you a small inflationary addition effectively to the budget cap, but apart from that, nothing is really going to change. So I think it was quite clear when that punishment was dished out to Red Bull that they're taking this seriously, and it's got to be taken seriously, right? I mean, what's the point of the cost cap if it can be ignored? But going forwards, any breach is going to carry a greater weight, especially if it's a repeat offence, and we'll get into that. But Stefano Domenicali says, going forwards, the penalty will be sporting. Last year, it was effectively economic, or you can consider it to be technical or financial in some respects, $7 million fine, and then that 10% reduction in testing time. They didn't dock Verstappen any points, they didn't dock him the championship or anything like that. They said, all right, it was the first season, I think was probably one of the reasons why it seemed more lenient than some said it should have been. But going forwards, he's been quite clear. This is not from the FIA's perspective, this is from Formula One management, but it's kind of, they should be aligned on this, you would think. That's sporting measures, and sporting measures means points reductions, as far as I'm concerned. Now, if it was Red Bull again that have breached it, as they might have done, and we'll go on to discuss the teams here in a second, they and Verstappen won the championship by quite a lot. So, if they were to do like a 10% reduction in points, it's not going to really make any difference, is it? So it will get really interesting, this, and it will continue to. Now, Red Bull might not have breached the cost cap, but the rumour has it that 3 teams out of the 10 did. And, well, who do you think they were? Just to be very clear, this is not this season. Some are saying, it's got to be Mercedes because they bought the W14B, which they didn't really. But still, this is for last year, right? Now, Mercedes did bring a lot of upgrades last year. Aston Martin did bring an entirely new car, and they had that breach in 2021, but it wasn't an actual breach in the terms of the cost cap numbers. It was like a technicality where they filled in a form wrong. Someone got fired for it, and they got fined a certain amount of money. But we're talking 2022 season here. Who spent more than the cost cap? Because apparently 3 teams have done. Now, it could be anyone, and it's difficult to say, but you've got to say the most likely team is probably Red Bull, just because they broke it in 2021, and as I say, by the time it got around to this being a talking point last season, the season was basically done. A lot of the spending had already been dished out to such an extent that if teams were going to be in breach, then it's quite likely that that will have already have happened by the time it became clear how serious of a deal this was going to end up being. So this is what the article says, that it's going to be a hot period in Formula One for multiple reasons. A lot of this is around the cost cap. They reckon that 3 of the 10 teams, that's the rumours, that 3 of the 10 teams have breached it. So is that going to be Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari? We don't know. But it's quite interesting that Christian Horner at the end of last season said he reckons 6 teams are over. And, that might indicate some, a potential risk that Red Bull are going to be over again. And Mercedes and Toto Wolff, his statement has always been, absolutely not. We've got all the people in place to make sure we're not doing any breaches of the cost cap. And for Mercedes and for some other teams in Mercedes' position, they can't really afford to, right? If Mercedes are over, if they were in that territory of cheating, as Zak Brown described what Red Bull did, Zak Brown wrote a letter to say that Red Bull cheated last year. Horner wasn't happy about that choice of words, but Red Bull their brands, they can kind of get away with it, you know what I mean? If Mercedes are considered to have cheated, that's really damaging to their brand, outside of Formula One for the sales of their cars and stuff like this. So, they really can't afford that to happen. And maybe they're over, maybe they're not, we don't know. So we have no rumours as to which 3 teams these are, and if it even is 3 teams, might be 4, might be 5, might be 0, might be 1. But, we can only speculate on what we might think those teams could be, and I've given some reasons why Red Bull, I think, will be a little bit nervous here because of the way things went last season. And additionally, if Red Bull were to go over again, you'd think they would get an even more severe penalty for a repeat offence than just a first-time offence would be. But intrigued your thoughts on that in the comment section below. This was the quote, by the way. I believe this quote initially came out in December last year, but it was re-put out by Denny here in April. April, where Christian Horner said that 6 teams may have breached the cost cap in 2022. He actually, I believe, mentioned that in a meeting they said that some teams will break it. A danger for 2022 is there could be 6 teams in breach. Energy prices have been exponential. Thankfully, we've been protected from that. I think the current status is that 6 teams are over it. Inflation was something that was not calculable to that extent, especially when it comes to energy costs. So read into that how you will, but many people are looking at this thinking, well, Red Bull are kind of admitting that if there's 6 teams over, they're probably going to be one of them. But if there's 3 teams over, who really knows? Now, look, is it going to be Williams, Haas and Alfa Romeo that overspends? And this is for 2022, and this time next year, we're going to be talking about this for 2023, more than likely. And thankfully, they're speeding up the process a bit more, because last year it was like August, September time where we started to hear rumblings about this. They're bringing it back a little bit earlier. They've got the calculations done quicker, so they can resolve this earlier than before. This was, out of interest, last year's team and driver standing. So Red Bull won 759 points. Verstappen won by a lot over Charles Leclerc, just eking out Perez for P2. Then it was Russell, Sainz, Hamilton, Norris, etc. This was your top 10. And in terms of teams, it was Williams, Alfa Tauri, then Haas, Aston Martin, Alfa, McLaren, Alpine, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, way above the rest, as is usually the case. So yeah, take your pick for which of these teams might be over the cap. And if they are, what do you do? Like, let's say Red Bull are over the cap again. If you dock them 10% of their points, it doesn't matter. So, you know, it's going to be really interesting. And I'm sure that people aren't going to shut up about this for some time. I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of quotes this weekend about from Toto Wolff and Horner and all these others about what's going on. And it's interesting it's been leaked early, because I'm pretty sure they're not going to finalize the data on this until probably the end of the month. I think we're probably 2 weeks away, roughly, from knowing and getting some actual official announcements as to which teams are over, which teams are under. But we're 2 weeks away, and yet still we have some very interesting rumours to discuss. So tweet your thoughts on that in the comment section below. Thought this was quite an interesting stat here from F1 Stats Guru to close out with. This is the first time since 2013 where we have all of the numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4 represented on the grid. With Ricciardo turning, we have number 3, obviously Sargent's number 2, Norris is number 4. The last time we had this was pre-turbo hybrid era, with Vettel number 1, Webber number 2, Alonso was 3 at the time, and then Massa was running the number 4 in his car. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.